Hey, what's happening, guys? Dan Darrow here with another Options in Play video update. So, first off, as you can tell from the action the last couple of days, the near-term character trend of the market might be shifting a little bit, right? Uh, spoke a couple weeks ago how the different styles of trades were beginning to change, whereas for most of December and January, it was the volatility strategies targeting larger than expected moves either way. February transitioned more to bullish breakouts, right? Trend continuation, bullish breakouts, and now as we've basically entered the beginning of March, things are starting to shift a little bit. Slightly weaker tape over the last few sessions, maybe the last week and a half, starting to change the setups again. What's working, what's not working. So just something to take notice of, right? Doesn't mean that the trend is necessarily broken. It just means that there are some signals that it may be shifting again. So kind of have to wait and see and just kind of react to what ends up working. So today, in this video, I want to talk about maybe some name you guys aren't really familiar with, put it on your radar, Eventbrite EB. So a recent IPO that's fallen off its high, right? IPO'd, traded up to 40 kind of quickly in the aftermath of coming public, and then just rolled over really sharply in October. And what's interesting is that it's been in this just increasingly tight pennant, right? Increasingly tight consolidation for several months now, right? So let's draw these lines real quick. You can see, easy peasy, right? So you got this increasingly tight pennant forming, and for those of you not familiar, Eventbrite's software stock, which not to get into the fundamentals, not to get into like the nitty gritty of the fundamentals, but suffice it to say that it's a software stock, recent IPO, and these types of names have been particularly volatile recently, right? So recent IPOs and software stocks on their own. So kind of it's the nice combination of IPOs have been performing well and software stocks have been performing well, and Eventbrite, right, is really neither. It's not a particularly great performing IPO, and it's not a particularly great performing software stock. It's well off its highs, and it's just basically been sideways for a few months. So a recent issue, software stock, valuation's not too bad. There's some that are pretty stretched, but the valuation's not too bad. So I was looking at it coming to the week. I thought there was some potential here, right? Going back, the thing with Eventbrite that's maybe even more interesting to me is that there's only been one earnings report. Okay, so they've only had earnings once, and that was back in November. Here, so November 12th, right? So that was this day. It was down about $3, or maybe a little bit more. But what's interesting about that is that there's really not a lot of historical reference, right? So one report really doesn't give you a good idea of what the average move is going to be here, right? I mean, and especially like the first report as a public company, I do like to be involved with those sometimes, but what you'll encounter, like the more you do, is you realize that a lot of the numbers are kind of messy. So there's a lot of moving parts. A lot of maybe one-time expenses associated with coming public. Analysts maybe not familiar with how the company plans on guiding, so on and so forth. So it can be a little bit choppy, a little bit messy. So it's not one quarter is not going to give you the idea necessarily of what this is going to move going forward. So there's not a lot of historical reference. So there's a few things. So like this really nice, increasingly tight setup, right? B, it's a recent IPO that's in a really hot sector, right? Software. And I know that they've cooled off the last couple of days, but generally speaking, it's a recent IPO in a really hot sector in an increasingly tight consolidation, right? With not a lot of historical reference. So it's basically the options priced at like 3 to 3.25. What they're at now is more or less in line with what it moved last quarter. But there's really nothing saying like that's going to be the average going forward. So I like the idea of the uncertainty here, right? That you don't really know. Like was last quarter maybe ended up being like a lot lighter, and then you get this combination of a stock that's in a tight pattern in a hot sector, recent issue, not a lot of levels above, not as many well-defined levels below, and which I didn't even mention yet, it's heavily shorted. There's about 25% of the float, between 20 and 25% of the float is sold short. So low float, high short interest, tight consolidation, hot issue in a hot sector with not a lot of historical reference to go off of. So felt like this one set up well for a volatility candidate, right? Basically thinking if it's good and it breaks out, there's a lot of room to run. If it's bad and it breaks down, I mean, it could have a quick date with 25 underneath, right? So that was one I had circled coming into the week. I'm sure it's not a household name, but I wanted to put it on your guys' radar to take a look because it's not always the biggest names or the biggest market caps or the ones that everybody knows about that are the best setups. Sometimes it's these like under the radar plays that maybe don't get as much attention, which have a lot more potential. So take a look. Let me know what you think. All right. As always, I love to hear from you guys. So questions, comments, what you think about EB or what you think about any trades this week or what you think about any trades next week. I'd love to hear from you. So please reach out. All right. So I hope you guys have a great night, and I'll talk to you all tomorrow.